Production. Hello, everyone. I'm happy today to share with you our first significant step towards the long-term objective we have with our team, which is to build a publicly available geolocation database of IP addresses. So IP address is very simple. It's about assigning geographical coordinates to an IP address. It might be one of the most important metadata one can retrieve from an IP address. It has application in the industry for mapping a client to a server, in research for studies about censorship or outage detection, but also for policymakers for applying laws on the internet. But despite this importance, currently there exists no publicly available geolocation database that offers both sufficient coverage and precision. And we see that as quite problematic because researchers often has to rely on private companies' geolocation database with unexplainable results. So a problematic state of affair, but also a frustrating one, because we have a public measurement platform, RIPE Atlas, that would allow us to geolocate a large number of IP addresses with great precision, but we lack methodologies to scale geolocation on such a large platform. So we made two contributions towards this objective. A replication paper we presented last year, where we've been able to show that, yes, methods from the past could not scale on RIPE Atlas. And a second contribution we presented this year with a new methodology, which will be the content of this presentation. So first of all, what are we talking about in terms of geolocation? It's very simple. We have a bunch of vantage points from which we can make pings towards an IP address we want to geolocate. And then we use the coordinate of the vantage point with the lowest latency as a proxy of the coordinates of the target. It's called shortest ping, and it's the most precise geolocation technique we have. So of course, smaller the latency, greater the precision. And in practice, we consider 2 millisecond latency as metropolitan or city level precision. So what's the problem? We have an IP address we want to geolocate, and we have 10,000 vantage points spread across the globe. And the question is, which vantage points to measure from? Because we will not be able to use all the vantage points to geolocate millions of IP addresses. First of all, because it would take too much time, and it would be too much of a burden for RIPE Atlas, which is not a measurement platform dedicated to geolocation. We are not the first ones to try to answer this question, which vantage point to use. There are basically two families of methodology. One family that is based on public data to find geographical hints about an IP address. So either WHOIS data, reverse DNS, or network information. This is the principle behind single radius. That is the current geolocation engine implemented on RIPE Atlas. And the problem with these methodologies is that they are only applicable for a small number of IP addresses. On the other hand, the second approach is a round-robin algorithm. So a first round of measurement from a restricted set of vantage points to estimate the geographic position of an IP address, and a second round of measurement to refine this geolocation. And the problem with these methodologies is that the measurement cost is still too high to be deployable in RIPE Atlas. And well, this is why we built a GeoResolver methodology for efficient vantage point selection applicable for any IP addresses, both in IPv4 and IPv6, although we've only focused our work on IPv4 so far, and which operates with a fixed cost of 50 vantage points with near optimal precision. So near optimal precision, the precision we would obtain using all the vantage points available. This work is based on two main assumptions. The first one is that content delivery network, CDNs, so we're talking here about Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. They are good at geolocation. And the second assumption, maybe the most important one, is that there exists a correlation between the DNS redirection similarity on one hand and the geographical proximity between two IP addresses. And it's based on this DNS redirection similarity that we are able to select vantage points that are geographically close from an IP address. So multiple challenges to solve to test this idea. First, we need to have access to all DNS redirection for any IP addresses. Then we need to be able to evaluate the similarity between two DNS redirection, and finally build a methodology to select our vantage point based on this similarity. So to illustrate that, we have our IP address, 10,000 vantage points, and with our methodology, we select 50 vantage points here in blue, the IP address we want to geolocate in red. And as we can see, they are all in the same geographical region as the target, here in the same country, and ideally in the same city, which is Madrid. So before explaining how we select those vantage points, very quickly, what a content delivery network is. It's a massively distributed network infrastructure that hosts internet services through replicas spread across the globe. One of the objectives of those CDN is to reduce the latency experienced by their clients. And one way to do that is to redirect clients that are geographically close from them to servers that are geographically close, sorry. Intuitively, a client in Europe will be mapped in Europe, a client in the US, etc. So what happened when a client requests for a service? Very quick recap of DNS. The client emits a DNS request to Resolver, which will recursively transmit this query up until a name server, which is the entity that owns the information about which IP address is linked to a particular service. And then the name server sends back the request to the client. In classical DNS, let's say, this resolution is based on the IP address of the resolver and not of the client directly. So it's a problem for us. But thankfully, there exists an option in DNS called ECS, for Extended Client Subnet, which allows us to inject information about the IP address of the client directly within the DNS query. So it's up until the /24 subnet in IPv4 and /56 in IPv6 to preserve anonymity. And this information will be transmitted to the name server directly, which will make the resolution this time on the prefix of the client directly. So what happened when the name server is doing the redirection? Again, very roughly, it will interrogate a geolocation database to know where the client is, to assign a server, an optimal server, let's say. This geolocation information can be of different nature, either private companies datasets, measurements made by the CDN itself, or privileged information from operators, because those CDNs are working in close relationship with internet services providers that host their clients. This is why CDNs are good candidates for extracting geographical hints from an IP address. One great thing with ECS is that we can inject any /24 prefix within the DNS query, meaning that with ECS, we can access the results of the redirection for any IP addresses, and well, we solved our first challenge. The question is now how to evaluate the similarity between two DNS redirection. I made here a small example of the prefix of the IP address we want to geolocate, the prefix of a vantage point for which we know the geolocation. We select a bunch of host names of CDNs. We perform the ECS resolution. We obtain a list of IP addresses for each host name. And then we use the Jacquard index, which is a very common metric to evaluate the similarity between two sets of elements, to evaluate the similarity of the redirection for each host names. And finally, we use the average similarity across host names to evaluate the similarity of the two DNS redirection for the two subnets. So fine, we have our metric to evaluate the similarity. Now how to select the vantage point. It's pretty straightforward. We do the ECS resolution for the target. We do the ECS resolution for all the vantage points. And then we calculate the ECS redirection similarity between the resolution of the target and all the ones of the vantage points. And finally, we use the end vantage points with the highest redirection similarity to the target, because our assumption is that there exists a correlation between DNS redirection similarity on one hand and geographical proximity. And then we perform the ping and we apply shortest ping to obtain the geolocation of our IP address. So if we get back to our example, one IP address, 10,000 vantage points, we make the ECS resolution for the target, for the vantage points, we calculate the score, we obtain our 50 vantage points here in blue, then we perform the ping, and finally, we obtain here in dark blue the vantage points with the lowest latency. And here, this is a real example, by the way, of an IP address we geolocate with a distance error of 7 kilometers. and a measured latency of 0.7 milliseconds. So how to evaluate, I'm going to skip this part. How to evaluate this? We evaluate this methodology on a dataset of 751 IP addresses, all RIPE Atlas anchors, which are vantage points with a bit more computational power than the others. And more importantly, the geolocation of those vantage points is manually checked by RIPE Atlas. So it makes a dataset for which we have a good confidence about the geolocation. So a relatively small dataset compared to the sheer diversity of the internet, but with sufficient network and geographical diversity to evaluate the validity of our methodology. Here it is presented on the left the cumulative distributive function of the geolocation error function of the proportion of targets. So here in blue, you have the geolocation precision we obtain when using, so the optimal one when using the 10,000 vantage points. And in pink, very close to it, the precision we obtain with 50 vantage points selected with our methodology. We performed the ECS resolution on 389 host names. So I spare you the details on how we selected those host names, but the idea was to maximize the diversity of the CDNs present within the dataset while keeping a balance in the representation to avoid giving too much importance to a particular CDN, to a particular resurrection strategy or geolocation knowledge. And what we observe is that with only 50 vantage points, we geolocate 94% of all the IP addresses we could have geolocate under 40 kilometers, which is considered as metropolitan city level precision. So to put that in perspective, 50 vantage points is 10 times less than single radius, the current geolocation engine on RIPE Atlas, and only 4.3% of the measurement costs needed for other methodologies, state-of-the-art methodologies. So 50 vantage points, it really, it's possible to envision internet scale geolocation. And well, that's exactly what we did. So when we geolocating IP addresses in the wild, we cannot evaluate the geolocation error, of course, because we only get the latency. And what we observe is that 90% of the IP addresses we geolocate between 1 and 2 milliseconds have a geolocation error of under 40 kilometers. So that's why we use this 2 millisecond threshold. And so far, we geolocated 200,000/24 prefixes under 2 milliseconds, which represent 25% of all the prefixes we tried to geolocate. And also 420,000 unique IP addresses. So again, to put that in perspective, it's comparable to the current largest publicly available geolocation database, which is RIPE IPMap. And although it's too soon to tell if this 25% will be our final result after geolocating all the IP address, one thing is sure is that with our methodology, we can considerably extend the size of currently existing publicly available geolocation database. So yeah, I presented you GeoResolver, a cheap and easy to implement methodology for efficient vantage point selection that would allow us to perform internet scale geolocation on RIPE Atlas. Of course, all of the code and dataset will be made available. It's still not the case because we are in the process of submission, so hopefully soon in the future. And of course, all the resources and tools we've been using are open source and publicly available. Thank you all very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. So maybe a naive question. So you use for geolocating only like the vantage point that is going to be the closest with the smallest latency to the target. Why, I mean, don't you use multiple vantage points and triangulate, you know, a little bit like GeoSatellite would do? Is there too much noise on the others? Especially if you have many measurements, would it be able to reduce, to improve the accuracy?
Yeah. So a very good question. There is another technique in geolocation, which is called constraint-based geolocation, and it's basically GPS applied to geolocation. It's the same idea. And that's a result we've been able to show in our replication paper, is that with shorter spin, we obtain better precision than with constraint-based geolocation, which is this multi-iteration technique. And basically, the idea is that because we have so much vantage points, so the cycle defined by the vantage point with the lowest latency is comprised within all the others. And so because of that, we obtain the best precision when using just the single vantage point that has the lowest latency. Okay. Yeah. But it was quite a surprising result. Yeah, yeah. It's a different paradigm of using RIPE Atlas instead of, well, in the past, no, it's close, but Planet Lab nodes, a few hundreds of vantage points. Here we have 10,000, and it completely changed. Okay.
So it's the abundance of vantage point, really, and the fact that you can place them adaptively to the target also.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Good.
Thanks for the talk. So you used DNS redirection and providing the subnet of the target, that essentially. And so I guess my question is there a possibility that the DNS resolver will at some point prevent that? Because, I mean, this will be an address block that is not associated where the DNS request is coming, right? So in the same way that they're preventing spoofing by checking addresses, it might eventually be the case that DNS resolver will do those kind of checks. So I don't know if you've had some concern about that.
That's, I don't know, honestly. To me, it's because, yeah, I agree. It looked like spoofing. That's true. And when I learned about this option, I was even surprised that they were not checking. And I don't clearly have a reason why they are not doing that.
Right.
So, yeah, I might need to check into that. Well, I think the thing is that, you know, with DNS clients, they are using resolvers. So at the name server, so the entity that will perform the redirection, they have the IP address of the resolver, which might be in a different prefix, different IS from the clients that emitted the request. So I guess actually this might be the reason, because the IP address and the prefix injected is not matching in normal cases.
Okay. So maybe the other quick question is, so you mentioned that you use 50, right? Is there any sensitivity to that number?
Yeah, sorry, I don't have the backup slide for that, but basically we saw that increasing the number of vantage points from 50 to 100 to 200, we had very small gains, while decreasing from 50 to 20 to 10, here we had a huge decrease in terms of precision. Okay. So trade-off.
Right. Thank you.
Basically.
Any further question? Yes.
So yeah, my question was about this trade-off of precision versus cost of how many. So do you have an idea of what is the precision required for the different use cases you mentioned? Because for content delivery networks, maybe 500 kilometers is okay. I have no idea. Maybe for finding a terrorist, maybe you need more precision. So do you have an idea of the precisions that make sense?
At least for the two use case I talked about, which is censorship and outage detection. Here, indeed, we have two very different requirements. For censorship, just knowing where the IP address, which country the IP address is sufficient. But for outage detection, so knowing where something happened on the internet, you might need more precise geolocation. So yeah, it depends on the use case, but usually with city level precision, we have something that is sufficient. And actually in the replication we made also, there was other papers that claimed street level precision. So basically a few hundred meters, less than 1 kilometer at least. And we've been able to show that, well, no, it's not the case. So claiming more than city level precision seems difficult, or at least we don't have the methodology to do that.
Any other question? Thank you, Hugo. And we are almost perfectly on time for the coffee break. So